Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick, Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs counting you down to the closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell. It's our global simulcast, joined right now by Massar and Tim Stenovec. We welcome our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio, and YouTube. Carol, looking at the S&P 500, pretty much back to the lows of the day here. Really haven't seen any major bouts of buying at all, at least on the S&P on this day.
Yeah, different tone from what we saw yesterday and certainly from the last couple of days when we saw the S&P 500 up 2 days. Really a laggard, I mentioned it earlier, is the semiconductor names under a lot of pressure. The stock's down right now, Tim, about 2.4%.
Yeah, we just had a really interesting chat with Robert Stimson over at Oak Associates. He said that there's confidence that the Fed is on course to tackle inflation, but the question that he has is about how aggressive it's going to be in trying to bring it down.
As in questioning whether it should be more aggressive, because many feeling that these levels with inflation in the print, we're going to get above 8%. They need to go hard, they need to go fast, but it is going to hurt, of course, the overall economy. It is the chorus of voices saying it is getting harder and harder to land this softly. Of course, we just heard from the latest Nobel laureate today, Taylor.
We did. Of course, Schiller, I think, is the one that you're referring to. We spoke with Anna Hahn, not a Nobel laureate, but certainly really smart in her own right. And she was saying that still, even if the Fed continues to move, and she's looking at 350 basis point hikes here, that really still only looking at about a 40% odds of recession. And Romaine, I was reading a note from the business cycle report from Merck Investments. They're still only seeing 35%, that the indicators are strong.
Yeah, the indicators are strong. And I think the problem is that no one really knows. And I don't mean that as a diss to anyone, but sometimes we get to these sort of precipices where it's very clear we're headed towards a recession. And sometimes we're at a stage where it's very clear we're going to avoid a recession. And I think right now we're kind of somewhere in between. And I think that's maybe why you're seeing kind of a lot of the sideways movements, at least on a week-to-week basis with regards to this equity market. You're looking at the S&P 500 right now. That's going to close the day right around that 4,100 mark. And again, it's kind of been bouncing around between that 4,000 level and that 4,200 level for quite some time now. It's lower by 1% here on the day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down by about 0.8% here on the day, while the NASDAQ Composite is going to finish lower by 0.7%. And as far as some of those cyclicals, well, you talk about the Dow Transports that are down 4% on the day, mid-caps that are down about 2%, and the Russell 2000, Carol, down 1.5%.
You know, you guys were talking about sentiment. I mean, it may not be, officially a downturn or a recession, but if people are nervous and they pull back, it might as well be. S&P 500, Taylor, you're going to get into the groups, but most of the names in the index, 452 to be exact, on the downside today.
Yeah, and you really see that on the individual sector level as well. For our radio audience, we're looking at some of the best performers, the worst performers, sort of two levels underneath the surface. And there's a lot of red, even on some of the, quote, best performer screen. There's actually only three sectors here in the green today. It's autos, energy, and media and entertainment. But still, most of that is flat, not a whole lot to write home about. Let's take a look at some of the losers, Carol. This is where things really get interesting. It feels broad-based. You think about some of the banks and some of the financials. Those were under pressure today. Semi-components, I know you've talked a lot about that, Carol. Real estate and also transportation. We're continuing to be concerned a little bit about some of the inflationary and some of the supply chain impacts of all of this post-COVID world.
All right, so let's get to some of the gainers. I had to change my list a little bit because the gainer turned negative. But one that definitely stayed in the green today was shares of Alibaba, really holding on to most of the up move in today's session, closing up just shy of 15%. Again, we continue to see sentiment easing when it comes to those Chinese names trading over in Asia, trading here in the United States. China approving a second batch of video games, so it does feel like China officials are easing when it comes to some of those internet names. Roku, want to mention that one, up 9% in today's session, rallying big time. This after Insider reported that the company had closed the trading window for all employees, a move that stopped them from selling their vested stock. So that'll do it. And then I want to mention Etsy. This was a top name in the S&P 500. No real news except CalSTRS coming out and backing Etsy on 3 of 5 proposals at their upcoming June 15th meeting. Stock is still, though, down about 60% so far this year, and about 11% of the float is shorted. So there's a lot of negative tone continuing to surround Etsy, Tim.
All right, speaking of negative tone, Altria Group, the company that sells more.
Etsy the other day.
What?
What's that?
I just bought something off Etsy.
Bow tie?
What'd you buy?
No, not a bow tie.
What was it?
For the
I'm going
dog?
to teach you how to wear a bow tie. Yeah, any tie, actually. I don't think I've ever seen one.
All right, deal. We'll do it. Let's talk Altria Group. It's down 8.39% today. It's the company that sells Marlboros here in the U.S. It's having its worst day since March of 2020. This after Morgan Stanley downgraded it to underweight, giving the stock its only negative analyst rating. Morgan Stanley essentially saying that rising gas prices and weaker consumer sentiment are likely to weigh on cigarette volumes. Charles Schwab also falling 2.6% today. Shares of a lot of online brokers actually fell after SEC Chair Gary Gensler outlined a plan that takes aim at payment for order flow. Gensler asking the SEC staff to consider creating an order-by-order auction mechanism so that retail traders could obtain the best possible pricing. We also saw shares of Robinhood fall today. Carnival Corporation falling more than 6% today. A lot of cruise companies. Thanks to Morgan Stanley cutting the price target not just on Carnival but
Those things are
Royal
full.
Caribbean,
I was walking down the west side.
Norwegian. You see them all the
jam-packed.
time here.
Yeah.
Well,
Are you getting on one?
I'm not. Were you?
Case
Not
in
me.
point.
No,
Yeah.
times are hard out there. And you heard we're headed towards a recession. People can't even afford Coke anymore. They got to pour vinegar into seltzer water just to get the taste of it.
Well, that's what Morgan Stanley is essentially saying. Weak channel checks when it comes to the cruise lines, growing macro risks, and rising debt costs too.
Romaine is such a man of the people, balsamic vinegar and seltzer. Meanwhile, I'm looking at
Is that
what
the secret formula?
Apparently, according
Yes, the
to
secret
our
sauce.
producer Faith, she's giving us all the gossip. Meanwhile, let's look at the commodities that aren't balsamic vinegar and seltzer. I'm looking at commodities that are pushing higher. And once again, this is why we've got the inflationary pressure that is so front and center for investors today. And indeed, why yields have moved as they have. Brent crude up 2.9%. We're $124. WTI $122. Once again, the inventory levels in the US just showing how so tight we are in terms of the supply side of this market. We can go over to what's happening in the foreign exchange market, therefore, and actually, I mean, nothing's really being dictated by commodities. Everything's being dictated by a strong US dollar. We're up 0.3%. And indeed, you're therefore seeing the Japanese yen has just been a story of weakness. I've said it over the last couple of weeks, if not months. The yen now off by another 1.25%. This, as we see at a 20-year low, the real divergence here in terms of central bank policy. We're going to get the ECB tomorrow. Many feeling that, of course, will pull back on quantitative easing, maybe talk up the idea of some sort of rate hike. And, of course, the euro is currently trading lower against the dollar, weakening against the dollar. And I look at sovereign bonds, which across the board have been a sell of the day, Taylor.
Yeah, you certainly saw that, Caroline, here in the U.S. as well. We've been talking a little bit on this program, a decent threes yesterday or a few days ago, sort of a weaker tens auction today, and really hard to be finding buyers at these yields if we indeed that think, Carol, that we're going to be looking at a Federal Reserve hiking another 50 basis points or so in just about a week's time. And so who is going to be the buyer of some of these Treasury yields? And really the question is, how much higher do we need to go in order to get sort of that relative value, particularly with an equity market that's getting some of the froth taken out of it?
Yeah, I wonder, though, if the energy companies care. I know there's a headline that just crossed about ExxonMobil advancing to a record close. I'm looking at the S&P 500 this year. The 10 top performing names are all energy names. ExxonMobil is the 10th best performing name in the S&P 500, up 71% here. Though, you know, this story, I feel like it was a strong one last year, a strong one this year. And if you talk to folks in the sector, it feels like this is going to be something we're living with for some time.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing Devon Energy reporting a bolt-on acquisition as we speak. And what's also on the flip side of that, as we see the inflationary pressures, we talk about gasoline at $5 a barrel, $5 at the pump in general. We're looking at maybe a turn towards what happens with the consumer, with the retail numbers, Five Below coming out and the shares dropping after its earnings. So clearly we've got to keep an eye on where people decide they're going to be spending their cash, clearly not on cruises, potentially, according to Morgan Stanley.
Matt Maley, though, I believe when we were speaking with him on TV, had a good point that if inflation on Friday comes back down to, 8% instead of 8.5%, does that really mean the gas prices are going to be cheaper when we're traveling this summer?
Well, no.
Exactly. So
No,
I know it matters from an economic term, so from the consumer's perspective.
Yeah, and Bloomberg has done some great reporting on this. There's a lot of academic studies that shows you kind of the convexity, Taylor, that really isn't there when it comes to gasoline prices and the rest of what we see with regards to crude and just the general stuff. And I could tell you, I mean, we've written about this idea that it is having an impact. People are making decisions to trade off because they have to pay more to fill up their tanks. They have to pay more at the grocery store, and they've got to sacrifice something.
Yeah, that's exactly what analysts said about Philip Morris today, right? Or Altria, I should say.
They stopped smoking.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a good thing, right?
It is, but it speaks to the power of these prices. If they are so high, people are cutting back on things that oftentimes weren't necessarily considered discretionary, right?
Am I allowed to say that?
I didn't hear what you said.
Probably are.
Okay.
So I won't, you don't
Meanwhile,
repeat
I
it.
think history has come out on your side and then a certain extent,
Thank you.
Romaine. But
History will prove I'm right.
Meanwhile, did you see the story on the Bloomberg terminal about where it's expensive to be an expat at the moment? And when you look at some of the price points, Hong Kong, once again, still the most expensive. Yes, it's pegged to the dollar. It's a currency question. But it's also how much they're having to pay on their gasoline, how much they're having to pay on their rents, how much they're having to pay. I think their tomatoes per kilo or something extraordinary, like $11. So
wow,
this
per
is
kilo.
Per coffee, it's $5 per coffee in Hong Kong. New York came up really high, so
For one
too
cup
did
of
London
coffee?
because of rents.
What is going on?
Where's Duncan? Yeah, when you need it, huh?
All right. Well, that's
Duncan's okay.
It's just a reminder, right? Inflation, it's a global thing. Remember that. when you're-
Cheapest gasoline in Tehran, should you wish to go.
Oh, okay.
But I can't afford the flight to get
I'll add that to my
there.
bucket list.
All right, we got to run, guys. We'll have more to say tomorrow. That's going to do it for our cross-platform coverage. Radio, TV, and YouTube. Beyond the Bell is what we call it. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.